My name is Phyllis. I am 66 years old and have a memory that carries more silence than words. I've worked my whole life as a secretary at a law firm here in Springfield, Illinois. I bought this house with the sweat of my fingers and the tightness in my chest of someone who raised a child alone. After I was widowed at 31, I've always been discreet, one of those who show love with hot food on the table and a lavender-scented tablecloth. But tell me something. What kind of son raises his hand to his own mother because of a soup without salt? I know what you're thinking, that this cannot be real, that a mother like me didn't deserve this. That's that. For a long time, even I couldn't believe it. But when we live in fear inside our own house, with our bodies asking to disappear and our souls shrunk in a corner of the room, it's because something has gone out of place. If you've ever wondered how a woman gets to this point, and, even more, how she can get out of it with dignity, then stay here with me, because today I'm going to tell you how I turned the coup I took into freedom. And you'll never look at soup the same way again, madame. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. I've never been the kind of woman who likes confusion. I always prefer to lower my head, take a deep breath, and move on. One shall do, a shadow that drew, a time so drew. But there was a day, a single day, when everything inside me changed. That's when I entered, with my head high, the office where my son worked. No one there knew who I was. They only saw me as Aaron's mother. But when I left that room, I had documents in my hands that could turn his world upside down. What I discovered, it was not just a betrayal. It was a crime. And at that moment, even with my legs shaking and my heart racing, I understood that my story was going to change, that I would no longer be just a shadow inside my own house. If you've come this far and felt a tightness in your chest just imagining this scene, I ask you to accompany me. Give a like, subscribe to the channel. Oh, not only for me, but for all the women who have already been silenced within their own family. Your support gives me the strength to continue telling this truth, which even today is hard for me to breathe when I remember. Let's go together now, because this story, it needs to be told. I woke up every day at 5:30 in the morning. Even before the sun touched the kitchen windows, the house was still asleep, but my mind was already awake, making the list of the day's tasks. They were always the same. Prepare Aaron's coffee, sort his clothes ironed the night before, check if the tie matched the jacket, and leave the folded newspaper on the table. He didn't read the newspaper. Oh, well, you see, fashion went out to Gilday on Saturday, but he liked it to be there. It was a detail, and I've always been made of details. My son, Aaron, had moved back in with me after the second divorce, only until things settled down. He said, but it had been 3 years, 3 long years in which our house was his again, and I went back to being an employee without a salary. He was the financial director of a marketing agency in Chicago. He came every day with that neat blazer, the black briefcase, and the tired look. He worked a lot, it's true, but It had become dry, impatient, as if the mere fact that I existed already bothered him. Even so, I did everything the way he liked. Fat-free scrambled eggs, wholemeal bread toasted on both sides, strong coffee, unsweetened, neither hot nor warm, at the exact temperature. If, by chance, something went out of the standard, well, he didn't have to say anything. The way he dropped his fork on the plate, or how he ran his hand over his face, tired, was enough. That gesture killed me more than any words. In front of the others, so, Aaron was a successful man, always with an answer on the tip of his tongue, a firm posture, and there were now, Nihersa, Hasu Kalbi Estentry, a commanding voice, but inside the house, he was something else, someone who no longer looked me in the eye, who spoke to me like someone giving orders to a machine. Phyllis, turn off the light in the room. Phyllis, fix my shirts. Phyllis, get me some water. It was as if I had gone back in time. But for a time, I never wanted to live. I tried to start a conversation sometimes, tell something I saw on the news, ask about his life, remember some story from the time when he was little. But he never listened to the end. Mom, well, talk later. My head is full. And he turned his back. At those times, I smiled in the corner and went back to the kitchen. It was not the time to insist. There were days when he didn't even say good night to me. No, Joe. I just went upstairs, slammed the door, and that's it. Well, that's it. Other days, he brought his wife, Savannah, a girl who smiled with her teeth, but not with her eyes. I prepared everything to receive them, put the best dishes, lit aromatic candles. They barely ate. They said they were not hungry, and they laughed among themselves, looking at their cell phones. I collected the dishes intact and went to sleep with that feeling that I had done a lot for little. The house was always spotless, the carpets washed, the furniture dust-free, the cabinets lined up. But inside, something was not clean. The silence that dragged along the walls was not peace. It was fear. It was alert, a type of care that I no longer knew if it came from love or the fear of making mistakes, because every day Aaron seemed more intolerant and I more invisible. But there was a night when he arrived later. I was sitting in the living room, folding the bath towels. He came in, dropped his backpack on the couch, where I had just put the pillows away, and went straight to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, rolled his eyes. Nothing ready. As always, that went through me like a knife, but I kept folding the towel. Now, in silence, because arguing with him led nowhere, and deep down, I still thought that all that was just stress, but it wasn't. It was something else, something deeper, something that I still couldn't name, but that hurt in every gesture. No, there are things that we feel, even when no one says it. Contempt, for example, It doesn't need to be shouted at. It reveals itself in the plate that comes back full, in the thank you that never comes, in the look that passes by you as if it were a war. And this is where I wanted to pause, because maybe you there, on the other side of the screen, have also felt this, the feeling of being needed, but never valued, to always be present, but never seen, to do everything for someone, and still feel like a hindrance. If you've ever been through something similar, comment below with I've lived it or it's true. Sometimes, seeing that we are not alone when town, it already helps to breathe better. Back to that night. After his comment, I went to the kitchen, prepared an omelette in a hurry, put it on his plate without saying anything. He ate, none now, no nice, dropped a plate in the sink and went upstairs. Not even a good night. Not even a thank you. I stood there, now, looking at the scraps of food, the dirty cutlery, now, the cold light in the kitchen, now, soon. I wondered, at what point did I lose my place within my own home? I didn't know it yet, but that routine of mute obedience, silence, and survival. His days were numbered, and everything would begin to crumble for such a small reason, but so symbolic that to this day I shiver to remember. A simple soup, Mary, wow, and it was there, in that soup, that everything collapsed. But why? What exactly happened that night? Oh, this you will understand in the next part. And when you understand, wow, you will feel the bitter taste of the truth, as if you were yourself there, kneeling on the ground. Or did you watch Dick shot? It was a gray Saturday. One of those that the sky seems to weigh on the roof of the house. ID spent the whole day in the kitchen, cooking Aaron's favorite dinner, roast beef with potatoes, brown rice, and arugula salad with apple, just the way he liked it. But that day, the clock ran faster than I realized. When he walked through the door, his hair still damp from rain, and his face charged with tension. The food was still in the oven. There were exactly 10 minutes left. Only 10, and that's where it all started. He dropped the briefcase forcefully on the couch and came to the kitchen as if he already knew something was wrong. Where's dinner? He asked in that dry, cutting voice he used when he was about to explode. I tried to explain, calmly. I'm to see what got you. Only a few minutes left. Son, I had a mishap with the stove. But he didn't even hear me finish. You're useless. Phyllis, you can't do one thing right. And then he took the plate I had already set aside on the countertop, a clean plate, not even used, and threw it against the wall. The porcelain exploded like a bomb. The shards ricocheted off the kitchen floor. And the silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, staring at the pieces of what was my favorite dish, a gift from my mother, decades ago. He did not apologize. He did not collect anything. He just turned his back and went upstairs. The bedroom door slammed like a dry endpoint. But inside me, there was no endpoint. There was a question mark. I continued there, with trembling hands, picking up the pieces of the plate as if collecting the splinters of herself. I washed the floor, swept in silence, washed my face with cold water, dressed normally, and the next day, oh, I prepared breakfast as if nothing had happened. That's how I learned next. After that Saturday, something changed, not in his behavior, which only got worse, but in my way of feeling. It was as if something inside me had cracked. I began to pay more attention to the small gestures, the looks of contempt that I had previously pretended not to see. During meals, he would stop chewing in the middle of the food to say things like this: "Recipe is enough. You never change, or your food is getting bland." Like you. Cutting comments, delivered with a cynical smile and a fork in his hands. Savannah sometimes witnessed it, but never said anything. Me neither. I still, meanwhile, and as the weeks passed, he began to ignore me. Wow. Sometimes I would say good morning, and he would just walk right by, playing with his cell phone. Other times, I would walk into the house with friends or colleagues from the company, introduce myself only as "she lives here with me," as if I were a tenant or a cleaner. He started messing with my bank accounts. He said that, at my age, I could end up being deceived, and that he had better take care of everything. He transferred my pension to a joint account without consulting me. He canceled my debit card to simplify finances. At first, I believed he was just trying to help. After all, I've always been kind of slow with these online banking things. Passwords, apps. I thought maybe I was really being outdated. But then, the doubt came. He spoke with such certainty, with such control, nay, that I myself began to doubt my judgment. Was I getting in the way? Have I become a burden? I started to walk more slowly inside the house, so as not to bother me, to avoid sitting in the room if he was watching television. I started to pretend I didn't hear when he complained loudly on the phone, saying to someone, "My life is hell with this old woman watching me all the time." It was about me. I knew. He didn't disguise it anymore. It was as if he wanted me to hear it, as if he wanted to crush me inside. Oh, one night, after one of these comments, I went to the bathroom mirror. I looked deep into my own eyes. They were deep, faded, tired. I asked myself, where did the woman who raised this man go? Where did Phyllis go, who worked 10 hours a day and still had the strength to cradle this boy in her arms? Where did I get lost? I had no answer, just a huge void, full of memories cut by indifference. The next morning, he left a note on the kitchen table. He said, "You am going to be late. Don't wait for me. Have dinner ready and turn off the light in the hallway." No greetings, no subscription. It was like a command. I read that with cold hands, and at that moment, without thinking too much, I tore the paper into 4 pieces. Small, little, hard. I stitched and answered. Silent, no, very sisterly hard. I threw it in the trash. No one saw it, but I saw it. It was the first time I broke the cycle. A small gesture, but one that made me breathe differently. And maybe you're thinking that I should have said something, shouted at me, faced it. But I learned early on that not every battle is won by shouting. Some are overcome in waiting, at the right time, in silent resistance. But as much as I tried to keep myself whole, the cracks inside the house were getting louder. And what happened the following week? It was far beyond a crack. It was a blast. And when it came, no one could pretend that they didn't hear it anymore. It was a cold Tuesday, one of those in which the wind seems to pass straight through the bones. The house was quiet, as it always was, after 7 o'clock at night, when I started preparing dinner. That day fell. I decided to make a vegetable soup. Nothing much, just the usual. Carrots, potatoes, zucchini, leeks. Old recipe. I knew out my recipe. Aaron liked it, or at least he used to. I stood there stirring the pot slowly, letting the hot smell rise and fill the kitchen, almost as if it were a memory trying to be welcomed. It was my way of saying, I still care, even when everything around me told me it didn't make a difference anymore. He arrived without saying anything, threw his coat on the back of the chair, and went straight to the table. I served the soup carefully, adjusted the napkin on the right side, as I always did. He took the spoon, put it to his mouth. And it didn't take him even 2 seconds to spit it all back on the plate. The noise chilled me inside. You're good for nothing else, he shouted, with an anger that came from a place I no longer recognized. And before I could even process those words, he grabbed a hot bowl and shot it at me. I felt the impact on my face, the porcelain bursting on my skin, the cut of the shard opening my lip, and the hot liquid running down my blouse. My neck, my hands. I lost my balance and fell to my knees. The floor was cold, but it looked less cruel than my son's gaze. He even pushed me against the sink, as if I were an object in the way. And went up the stairs, stamping his feet. The door to the room closed with a bang, and then silence. There, kneeling on the floor of my own kitchen, with the taste of blood in my mouth and the smell of soup mingling with my shame. I didn't cry. No, I just heard. I heard the sound of my short breath, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the pan still releasing steam on the stove. And most of all, I heard a voice inside me, low but firm, saying, "It's over, you." I didn't get up right away. I stayed there for a long time, maybe hours, maybe minutes. I didn't even know it anymore. I only remember dragging myself to the bathroom, seeing my reflection in the mirror and hardly recognizing myself. The lip cut, the eye red, the soup still stuck to the collar of his blouse. I washed my face with cold water, now wiped it with a small towel, and went back to the kitchen, sat, and I stayed. The kitchen light was yellow, dim, there, and the noise from the street was gone. The whole house seemed asleep, except me. My feet touched the dirty, still, damp floor. And for a moment, that floor felt more welcoming than any hug Aaron had given me in years. I thought about getting up, cleaning everything, pretending that it hadn't happened, but something in me refused. Not this time. No more. Because there, how, in that heavy silence, a truth rose up inside me. No, and we adore the truth. I was not alive. I was surviving. And that broken bowl, that blood, this, that push. It was not the beginning. It was just the sign that the end was near. I didn't know yet how it would be. I had no idea. But I was sure of one thing. Whatever had to be done, I would do it. Because for the first time in many years, I had seen myself. I seen myself, and what I saw hurt me more than any cut. Now, I ask you, what happens when a woman who has spent her whole life lowering her head finally decides to stand up? Are you ready to find out? Because I was about to do something that no one imagined. Neither did he, much less me. The next morning, I woke up with my whole body throbbing. It was as if each part of me had its own memory, and they all screamed at the same time. I got up slowly. Washed my face, covered the cut of my lip with the old foundation that I kept at the bottom of the drawer. The makeup did not hide the pain, but it helped to hide the shame, or at least part of it. I put on my turtleneck sweater and walked down the stairs with light steps, as if walking over invisible shards. The kitchen still smelled of the soup from the night before. The broken bowl, of course, was already gone. How? But inside me, she was still whole. Aaron was sitting at the table, with the newspaper open, as if nothing had happened. Not a look, not a word about the night before. He looked up just to say, "You put on makeup? What a miracle. At least it disguises yesterday's fall." Then he laughed. He laughed as if he had told a harmless joke. I didn't react. I just served the coffee the way he liked it. Right temperature, no sugar. The trembling hands holding the cup as if it were a shield. He finished his coffee and left $40 on the table. "Savannah and her friends are going to lunch here today. It does something light, fresh. They like these magazine things." He didn't ask for it. Sent. Oh. As always, he took the briefcase and left, leaving the sound of the door slamming as the only goodbye. And I stayed there, alone with the money and with my stomach turned. But something was already changing inside me. I still made the coffee. He still ironed clothes. He still accepted the orders. But now I saw it. I saw everything. And more than that, I remembered not only of what he did, but of who I was before all that. The hours passed slowly until Savannah arrived. Punctual as always, beautiful, fragrant, with that dull air that never leaves the place. He brought flowers, artificial, like the smile he carried. "How are you, Mrs. Phyllis?" he asked, in that sweet tone that does not listen to the answer. "Why," I replied, "well, thank you." even with his lip swollen, his soul swallowed, and the blood still bubbling inside. She didn't ask any more. He didn't want to know. What mattered was that everything seemed normal. Lunch served, towel ironed, now fresh and clean environment. Staged perfection. Shortly after, night hotel, one city after, her friends came, all the same, full of empty stories, expensive bags and high-pitched voices. And it was in the middle of all that happened, something I didn't expect. One of the women, who entered last, holding a gift cake wrapped with a golden bow, looked at me and froze for a moment. Her eyes met mine, and there was a quick silence. It was Evelyn, my sister, my sister. Almost 10 years without speaking to each other. Old fights, misunderstandings that turned into walls. But I would recognize that look anywhere. She didn't say anything. He pretended he didn't know me. He greeted Savannah with a kiss and went into the room as if she were just another guest. But I understood. I understood her silence. It was not contempt. It was a warning. Evelyn knew. He had seen my face, my posture, and in that 2-second look, she gave me a message. I see you, love. And that alone lit a corner inside me that had been dark for a long time. I served the table with the same care as always, but my silence now had a purpose. I watched every gesture, every single word. I paid attention to the details. Savannah talking about gratitude and family while stirring salad. Evelyn looking at me when no one was looking. And I, nearly firm, only silhouetted calm, a stand self-taught, without looking away. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone, nor invisible. Oh, see, I stand not here. I was there. Oh, and someone, even if silent, saw the woman behind the apron. You know, sometimes all we need is a sign. Small, subtle, someone who looks back, that it does not deviate, that he recognizes us, and that day, between forks and napkins, I felt that maybe it was possible to recover something, a piece of me, a reminder of what it is to be seen with dignity. Am here, opening my heart, thus, telling my story with each wound still fresh inside me. If you are listening, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel. Not only for me, but for this story to reach other people who need courage. I still have a lot of things in store to tell you, and this story, it's far from over, because after that lunch, I couldn't sleep anymore. Something inside me had woken up, and that's when an idea began to take shape. Do you think I was afraid? Well, wait to see what I found out the next day. That same afternoon, after the house returned to its usual silence, and the smell of lunch was gone with the forced laughter of Savannah's friends, I went to my room. Now, not to rest, because rest was a word that was no longer part of my routine, but to simply, to be alone. I sat on the edge of the bed, took off my shoes slowly, looked out the window at the gray sky, starting to get dark earlier than usual, and let the thoughts invade me like wind coming through a crack. The memory of my sister, no, Evelyn's gaze, still hammered in my head. That look was not just a meeting of eyes. It was a mirror. No. And in it, I saw my whole life playing like a movie. The sacrifices, the silence, the loneliness that I disguised with service. That's when the phone rang. Unknown number. Hakeono Krevista Wang. My first impulse was to let it play, but something inside me, maybe the same something that made me tear up that note the other day, made me answer. This is, Phyllis. This is Adrian Castillo. An accountant at the company where his son, Aaron, works. Sorry to bother, but I really need to talk to you. Urgently. Now. The voice was serious, polite, but loaded with tension. My heart raced. It's about financial transactions in your bank account. Would you be available for a conversation in person? I froze. The bill. My name? I almost replied that I must be wrong, that my son took care of everything. But I restrained myself, unknowing that I'd done talk to them a lot. I shall not selfie. I took a deep breath and arranged to meet him the next morning, in a discreet cafe, 2 blocks from downtown. It's important that it's just you, okay? He said, before hanging up. And I said, all right, but inside, nothing was right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I rummaged through the drawers, checked old papers, looked for bank statements that I barely understood. Everything was under his control. Well, Aaron said it was to make it easier. Well, to protect me from fraud. It has always been convincing. I have always been obedient. But something now made sense in a new way. The decisions he made without consulting me, the passwords he exchanged, the cards he canceled for my good. I had no control over anything anymore, and maybe I never had. The next day, when I woke up early, showered, put on my cardigan and walked to the agreed cafe. Adrian was already waiting for me at a table in the corner. Condos. A young man, handian, discreet glasses, direct gaze. He greeted me with respect, as if he knew he was about to say something that could collapse an entire life. And he said, no, this is Mom. Phyllis, we were alerted by an internal audit about a suspicious movement in the company's accounting. The lady's name appears in records that indicate the use of a joint account for the purpose of embezzlement. That's more than $50,000. And there is documentation that shows that these movements have passed through your account repeatedly over the last few months. I couldn't breathe properly, but I didn't authorize any of that. I didn't even know these transactions existed. Adrian nodded. I am understanding. Understanding. We know that, but legally, the responsibility still falls on those who sign. So I came to look for her. Albenstadt, to know if you have knowledge, or if he is also a victim. Victim. Well, that word kept hammering in my head like a bell. Phyllis, the woman who raised that man with all she had, was now an accomplice. or victim of a crime he committed using my name. I felt a twinge in my head. Wow. A pressure in my chest. But I didn't cry. Not this time. Adrian then showed me copies of the documents. My name, my data, my own. Transfers, the signature that seemed to be mine. But it wasn't. He explained that if I didn't act, I would be directly involved. But if I collaborated, there would be a way to separate my responsibility from Aaron's. All we need is your word, and of your courage. He said that, looking into my eyes. Wow. And, for the first time, I didn't look away. Wow. I returned home with cold hands, but with a warm certainty deep in my soul. This was the last straw. It was no longer just about yelling, humiliation, or contempt. It was about identity, about dignity. Aaron hadn't just assaulted me. He was erasing me, using me as a facade. Nada until I'm no stuck, until canceling me inside and out. I walked in the front door, sat down at the table, and Kaupo, and stared at the same old furniture with a fresh look. Nothing had changed, but I had. No, I was no longer the same woman kneeling on the kitchen floor. I was someone who knew that he had proof, that he had a decision in his hands. And the strangest thing is that I didn't feel afraid. No more. What I felt, it was indignation. A kind of strength that grows when everything you have has been taken away. And what's left? It's just the truth. Now tell me, what would you do if you found out that your own son put you on the path to a crime? Because I decided to act, and in the next part, you'll see exactly how. That night, sleep didn't even come lightly. I sat at the end of the bed, with the lamplight on, my hands crossed in my lap, and my head full of memories that seemed to come in a row, one after the other, as if they had waited for years, for the moment to speak. Everything I had done for Aaron, every choice, every renunciation, every gesture that only a mother knows, began to reappear with painful clarity. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a fact. I found myself again in my early 30s, getting off the bus with heavy bags in my arms, after a late night shift as a hotel attendant, going straight to another job as a secretary, just so he could study at a better school. I remembered the snacks I made every morning, wrapped with hidden notes that said, "Mommy loves you," even when he didn't care. I remembered the nights when he had a high fever, and I sat on the floor of the room, with a wet cloth on his forehead and a lit candle, asking God to let me stay in his place, just so I wouldn't see him suffer. No. And then, the most recent episodes, which I pretended to forget, but which now came as a movie without pause. The day he showed up at home with a new car and said it was for me, but the car stayed with him. "You don't have to drive anymore, Mom. It's dangerous," he said. No. At first, I thought I was careful. Then I understood that it was control. There was also the day when he forbade me to go to church, the church I attended for decades, where I sang in the ladies' choir, where I met my husband. No, sister, not that song. He claimed it was too far, that the people there were weird. But I knew it hurt to accept. But I knew that he was ashamed of my simple ways, from my long skirt, from my hair tied up with bobby pins, of my way of walking, of talking, from my lavender smell, and that signature. Oh, ah, that blessed signature. Mom, if something happens to you, this here facilitates the inheritance. It's just a paper protocol, he said. No, why don't you talk? And I, as always, signed Onion. The house was in his name. How? The house I bought on my own, brick by brick, with her father's pension and every extra I managed to do in life. Now, everything fell into place. The pieces that I never wanted to look too closely at started to line up. It was not an exaggeration. It was not an impression. It was a plan, and a silent script written over the years, where I was a supporting player in my own story. I was erased, silenced, used, and as much as it hurt, as much as I felt a fool for having let it get here, there was one certainty consuming me inside. What? This was not going to continue. There's a time in life, and I say this looking into your eyes, when we understand that loving is not canceling oneself, that family is not an excuse for abuse, and that there is a limit between what can be endured for love, wow, and what is accepted out of fear, wow. And if you've made it this far, oh, I ask you, stay with me until the end of this story, because what is yet to come, no one expected it. No, neither did he. The sun was rising slowly, tinting the wall of my room a faint orange. I got up, washed my face, put on a discreet lipstick. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. What a town. You. And for the first time in a long time, I saw someone standing by herself. The look was still sad. Yes, fatigue still lived in the wrinkles. Ah, but there was a new fire behind his eyes. A fire that was not of rage. It was a decision. I went downstairs and found Aaron in the living room, in a dark suit and with his cell phone in his hand. Well, is there anything for today? He asked without looking at me. I said yes. That I was going to leave for a while. Do what? Now, what does? He wanted to know. Already with that tone of control that wrapped my stomach, I smiled slightly and replied, take care of what's mine. He didn't understand. Wow. But he understood enough to frown. And he must have been suspicious, because what was I going to do that day? It was going to be the beginning of the end of the lie he built with my name. I woke up before the sun. The sky was still dark and the world outside seemed in suspense, as if it knew something different was about to happen. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the house in silence, as if saying goodbye to a prison. In the bedroom, I chose my most sober outfit. A dark skirt, a button-down blouse, the coat I wore only at funerals and important days. Today, it was both. I tied my hair tightly. No lipstick, no perfume. Today, I wanted them to see my face the way it was. Firm, Nazir, and the angel Khan had to myself. Alankabalkalata. Decisive. Real. I went downstairs and didn't go to the kitchen. For the first time in years, I didn't make coffee. Mees. I didn't set the table. Me. I didn't put bread in the toaster. Aaron came down, minutes later, in a suit and a lazy look. Don't you have coffee today? He asked, with a cynical smile. I looked him in the eye and said, Today, I have an appointment. He laughed, as if it were a joke. But I didn't laugh. I grabbed my bag and walked out the front door without looking back. The drive to the office seemed longer than usual. Each step weighed as if it carried all the years I swallowed, in silence. When I arrived, Adrian was already waiting for me at the reception. He led me to a discreet room, with closed windows and the smell of paper. There was an envelope on the table and a tape recorder turned off in the corner. He offered me water. I refused. Are you ready? He asked. No. I just nodded. And then he handed me the documents. The text was clear. Formalization of complaint. Civil and criminal liability. Full name of accused. Why do you not die? I should have bet you were apart. Aaron Dwight Williams. My son. I picked up the pen. Signed. Wound. Without shaking. Without crying. I just signed. And at that moment, something inside me reorganized, as if all the pieces he broke, that I myself had let break, had fallen back together, not as they were before, but in a new way, stronger, my in the down, lashed in the light, more aware. Adrian looked at me in silence for a few seconds. Then he said, No, mount, out. As I did come now. You know that this can lead to a police investigation. He can be arrested. The company will not cover it up. The lawyers have already been called. No, Sikastan, Akshatated, and another Ajdu. I took a deep breath, and I replied, I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing it to get my life back. He just nodded. Now, no back high. Didn't turn his shoulder base, and walked me to the door. Now, if you need me, call me. I thanked him with a firm handshake. I walked slowly down. It wasn't guilt what I felt. It was relief, and for the first time, proud of myself. The street looked the same, but the ground beneath my feet was different. I was no longer the woman kneeling in the kitchen, nor the shadow who served coffee without receiving a good morning. I was someone who said enough is enough. That said enough. That he finally chose himself. When I entered the house, the silence greeted me with a hug I had never felt before. A dense silence, full of unspoken things, but now full of meaning. Aaron was in the living room, watching TV. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. What did you go to solve, Mrs. Phyllis? He mocked. I just walked to my room, hung my coat on the hanger, took off my shoes. I didn't answer. No, I didn't need any more. Silence was now my loudest response. He noticed. For the first time, I saw a trace of discomfort in his eyes, as if he knew, instinctively, that something had changed. And it did. And, boy, look, there is a moment in life when we stop asking to be seen and start to be. No screaming, no supplication, only presence. And that's when the other gets scared. What? Because he doesn't know how to deal with the woman he himself tried to erase by shining back inside. If you've ever felt that instant when you realize your worth again, comment here for me. He says, I understand you, or it's true. Because sometimes all we need is someone who has also been to this place. And you want to know what happened next. What did he do when he found out what I had signed? So wait, wow, because the impact hasn't even started yet. He arrived earlier that day. I was sitting in the armchair in the living room, sewing the hem of an old towel, trying to occupy my hands so as not to hear the thoughts that had been hammering in my head since I signed that paper. When the door opened wide and Aaron walked in, I knew. The way he slammed his briefcase on the table. Why, Anishzel. The way he dropped his coat on the floor. The way his eyes searched mine. It was no surprise. It was certainty. How? He knew. You've been in the company. He said, well, his teeth gritted. He didn't scream. Still, who did you talk to? With that, Adrian? What did you say? I took a deep breath and didn't answer. I continued sewing. The line slipped through my fingers, but my hand didn't tremble. He approached and suddenly ripped the towel from my hands. Have you gone crazy for good? No. He shouted. Do you want to end my life now? After all I've done for you? Nay. He began to walk around the room like a caged animal. He opened drawers, knocked over papers, tore old beads, threw the lamp on the floor. You don't know who you're dealing with. Mom, I swear, if you continue with this, I'll admit you. I tell you that you have dementia, that you no longer know what you signed, what you are talking about. And you know what? No one will doubt it, because you're just a confused old woman, a forgotten widow, a shadow in this house. That cut me inside. My skin unzo adao. More than the bowl of soup, more than any silence, any look of contempt, because he knew exactly where to squeeze. And for a second, I faltered. I thought, nice, Ristu. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe no one will believe me. But this doubt only lasted until the moment the doorbell rang. Clarice, my neighbor, was on the other side of the door. Mrs. Marlon Contirtio. I know what else to next to say. Phyllis, is everything all right there? He asked in a sweet but firm tone. Aaron froze. At the same time, his face changed. His shoulders relaxed. His mouth forced a smile. He walked to the door, opened it with false sympathy. Hi, Clarice! It's all right, Nil. Yes, my mother only dropped a few things here. It's okay, isn't it? No. Mom, man. I got up slowly and went to the door. I looked her in the eye. What an conceal, Stefan, and saw the same question Evelyn asked me days ago, without opening her mouth. Do you need help? But I said, I'll chew It's okay. Yes, honey, honey. Thank you for asking. She hesitated. But nodded. Anything. Just call me. And he left. But Erin understood. She understood that I was now being watched. That's it. Made him nervous. Well, that night, he didn't have dinner. He was locked in his room. I can. The silence of the house was heavy, as if each wall knew what was about to happen. I closed all the windows, locked the back door, turned off the lights, and locked myself in the bathroom with the key I hid behind the mirror. I sat on the cold floor, niece and you, hugged my niece and cried, not as one who collapses, but as one who washes inside. I cried out of anger, by impotence, because of the fear that still lived inside me, but I also cried for courage, for the decision I knew I had to make, because there was no more time. There was no more room. What you can't was shared on. Erin was going to try something worse. I saw it in his eyes, and this time, and there would be no neighbor, nor an interruption. It would be just me. No, there is a time when we understand that we either act or disappear. No. Either he chooses his own life, or he watches it end up in the hands of those who never knew how to value it. And if you've ever felt that way, caught between fear and courage, then you know what I'm talking about. That morning, there, on the cold floor of that bathroom, I made a promise to myself. Whoa, he would not destroy me. Man, and more, he was not going to get away with it. But how to overthrow someone who dominates everything? The answer, well, it came from a place he would never have imagined. And that, oh, deep down, he always despised. The days that followed were the quietest of my life. And, curiously, Petiona Akram, the noisiest inside. I did everything as I always did. I prepared dinner, tidied up the house, hung the clothes on the line. I watered the plants that Erin never noticed. But inside me, each gesture now carried another purpose. It was no longer care, it was preparation, observation, now strategy. He thought I had given up. Or dot he had wisdom. That his threat silenced me for good. He went back to ignoring me at meals, dropping his dirty briefcase in the sink, leaving without giving an explanation. And I let him. Now, only this time, Nan Akano Warju. He wrote it down, recorded, kept. I started walking with a tape recorder hidden in my apron pocket. I recorded his screams through the door, his cutting words, his harsh orders. I photographed the bruises still visible on my arm, on my shoulder, on the corner of my chin. Oh, I made copies of bank statements, contracts, records that he said wasn't for me, but that I now read with attentive eyes, even without understanding everything. When he left for work, I took another path. I went to the house of Joe Halvorson, an old friend of my late husband. Today, he lives retired in a simple house, surrounded by books and plants. I remember that he received me with a look that seemed to know everything before I opened my mouth. We sat on the porch, and I counted, not all at once. It was coming out in pieces, words that I didn't know could still come out of me. Joe listened to me as one who listens to a sacred story. Then he was silent for a few seconds and said, "Phyllis, you're not weak. She's just tired, and that's different." Those words crossed me like a hug after a storm. He guided me calmly. He said that I still had a legal right to the house, that there were gaps, paths, that we could file a request for restriction, freezing of assets, for reintegration of autonomy. He didn't promise magic, but he gave me back something I hadn't felt for a long time. Hope with structure. With his help, I filled out the necessary paperwork. I signed everything, and I let him forward the process through the correct channel. Everything discreet, everything clean. It was like putting together a puzzle blindly, and suddenly a piece fits perfectly. I returned home at dusk, walking slowly. The sunlight hit the windows as if waiting for me. I opened the door slowly, took off my shoes, hung up my coat, everything as always. But I was no longer the same. Inside, I calm. I was another woman. I had an ace up my sleeve, and now I knew how to play it at the right time. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. And sometimes, just knowing that someone is listening, it already changes everything. Aaron saw me arrive. Wow. I was sitting on the couch, playing on my cell phone. Where did you write? My feet on the table, I inherited from my mother. Wow. He looked up, but said nothing. Me neither. I passed him like a shadow. But the truth is that, inside, I was already shining. No wonder this come. The silence that was once fear, mine died. Now it was a shield. Now it was a weapon. One young shoe I put down, and he had no idea what I had started to build. Because when he knows, it will already be too late. But before that, there was one last thing I needed to do. Something that not even Joe would have imagined. And that would change everything. The next morning, I got up before the clock even woke up. I put on a light, simple dress and the pearl necklace that Aaron hated. Grow old, he would say, but that was precisely what I wanted to show. That I was. Yes, a woman who lived, who carried in her body the story of a lifetime. I took the bus in silence, with my bag tight to my chest and my heart beating more than usual. I went down 2 blocks before the destination to make sure no one would follow me. And I walked to the First National Bank, where my husband and I had kept our savings before everything turned to shadow. I was attended by a young woman named Mary Beth, a sweet face, curious eyes, hair tied up with a pen. I asked for absolute secrecy. I showed my old document, the one from my single days, which I kept folded in an envelope with the smell of mothballs. Does this account still exist? I asked. She typed, searched, looked at the screen with raised eyebrows. It's dormant. I hid on the time of but yes, still exists. Mrs. Yeah, Langley and Macamocob Langley Bar. My name before marriage. Now, first of all, at the moment, I heard my husband say softly in my ear, "You haven't lost everything." I told Mary Beth only what was necessary. I said I needed to regain control of my life, that there were people using my name without consent, and that I didn't want to cause trouble, only to protect what was still mine. She understood now. In fact, more than that, she felt, and it helped me with a delicacy that I had never experienced from a stranger. In a few clicks, we reactivate the forgotten account. Just over $800. Nothing that changed the world, but enough to remind me that I still had roots. There was still ground. Now. Then I asked her to help me transfer some of the funds from the joint account, the one Aaron controlled as if it were his own, to this new, private account of my own. New to know. She explained that certain movements needed prior notice, that there were bureaucracies. I accepted, no, but she went further, created an alert for unauthorized movements, updated my passwords, changed the notification email. It gave me access to everything. For the first time in years, I looked at a canvas and saw my name as the owner of my own story. There, what I am to stunt wow, on that icy bench, wow, among modern machines and papers with fine print, something changed inside me. I was no longer just a wounded mother. She was a woman under reconstruction, and I learned something that perhaps only pain teaches us. Money does not buy dignity, but it protects. It gives options. It gives freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I had all three things. Before leaving, Mary Beth gave me her personal number. If you need anything, call me. Sometimes, all we need is someone on the other end of the line. I thanked him with teary eyes, but a light chest. I'd earned more than one active account. He had gained an ally. When I returned home, Aaron was already there, with his coat thrown on the couch and the sound of the television filling the void in the room. He saw me enter, but didn't ask anything. He didn't even realize that I didn't have bags, that my look was different, that my hands didn't tremble. He still thought he was in charge. I still believed that my calmness was weakness. And little did he know, Hand said, that the tables had turned. No, there are moments in life that seem small on the outside, but on the inside, they change everything. Reactivating that account seemed like any gesture. No, but for me, it was like regaining a part of my voice, a part that he tried to silence, but now whispers inside me with more force every day. And if you're listening to this now, stay with me, because the most remarkable moment in this story is still coming. And when it arrives, it will make it clear that no woman is invisible forever. That night, before going to sleep, I looked up at the ceiling and silently repeated, "Now, Nanya, I have time. Now, no, I have power." But there was still one piece missing. A visit. A conversation with someone who could change everything. And I already knew exactly where to go. Returning to the basement of my house was like descending into the past on steps. Each step creaked as if asking me, "Are you sure you want to remember?" But I needed to. I needed to find the old documents, records that Aaron always said were somewhere. But in fact, he never let me see. The basement still had the musty smell of cardboard boxes, of old folded curtains, of memories that never went upstairs. I turned on the yellowish light and started scouring. At the bottom of a rusty bookcase, between old photos and a broken lampshade, I found a blue folder. The label was faded, almost illegible, but I recognized my husband's handwriting. Inside, everything was organized his way. Bill receipts, old letters, and in the below, a copy of a power of attorney. Aaron's name was there, but as a representative, the date was 10 years ago, shortly after my car accident. I remember that at the time he convinced me to sign, saying that it was just to make things easier. I signed it. I didn't even read it properly. But what made me freeze was not that. It was the next sheet, bugged behind by mistake. There was a contract for the sale of the house. My name, his name, and a subscription. My signature. But I had never signed that. Never. He would recognize my line from afar. And that wasn't my handwriting. The contract was incomplete, without a stamp, without authentication, and the buyer is Houston Warwire, a name that didn't mean anything to me. But most importantly, it was the attempt. He tried to erase me for good. Sell the house I built with my sweat. The house where I buried my husband, where I raised my son. He wanted to get rid of me, like someone discarding an old piece of furniture. I came out of the basement with sweaty hands and my chest heaving. I called Joe. He said he needed to see him, urgently. He attended me on the same day, sitting at his kitchen table. I handed over the papers. He read in silence, frowning, biting the corner of his lip. When he finished, Lord Johnson, he took off his glasses and said, "Phyllis, this is serious. This is falsification and more. Hardin, it is an attempt at real estate fraud." No. I felt a shiver down my back. He was unable to sell because the notary demanded his presence for the final signature, and he couldn't forge it without taking the risk. But he tried. That changes everything. Joe took other documents, typed in some requests, called the trusted contact in court. Within hours, he had already initiated an action to completely block the sale of the property, and he handed me a new document to sign, a formal contestation of possession and ownership, a definitive protection. I held the pen tightly, and when I signed it, well, it was as if I said, "No, in no uncertain terms, you didn't erase me. Aaron, it was, still here. I did I. What had just happened there? The pen slid steadily. No shaking. Undoubtedly. No. He has memories that are hidden for years. And one day, they come back to show us who we really are, who we were, who we can still be. And it's amazing how a simple sheet of paper can carry a lifetime of deception and an enormous force of rescue. Sometimes, looking back is the only way to move forward. What about you? Have you ever found something from the past that changed everything? A note, wow, a photo, a forgotten memory? Tell me here in the comments. Wow. Share with me. What if your story also wakes up someone who needs it? I returned home with that envelope pressed to my chest. I went up the stairs with my head held high, my heart still beating fast, but with a new rhythm. For the first time in decades, I was reacting with evidence, with courage, with name and surname. And Aaron, too. Aaron still had no idea that his house was no longer his own. But before I could reveal the last piece of my plan, I needed to face someone. Someone who also knew more than he seemed, and that for a long time he pretended not to see. Aaron arrived that Thursday with the same sure step as always. That hard sound of shoes hitting the living room floor. No, as if each step said, "I'm in charge here." He opened and closed drawers carelessly, took off his coat and threw it on the armchair where I always left a blanket folded. I was in the kitchen, now, standing, with my hands clasped in front of my body. The table was empty, no plate, no cutlery, no smell of food. He was surprised at the time. He looked at me, then at the clock hanging on the wall. There are 7 sharp. Nay, where's the dinner? His voice came with that tone of order. What? As if I were a switch that he turned on whenever he wanted. But I didn't move, not a step. I just looked up and said, in a firm voice, perhaps for the first time in years, "Today, you're going to make your own soup." He gave a short, mocking laugh, way, as if listening to a child say nonsense. Are you kidding? Mom, you think you can just... Aaron? I interrupted him. Drought. He froze. He had never heard me call him that again. By name. Without diminutive. Without sweetness. You have until Friday to leave this house. It is being notified. Mom. He frowned. Opened his mouth. On. Closed. No. He didn't understand. How? Or maybe he didn't want to understand. So I took 3 folded documents from inside my coat. The copy of the protective order, the injunction to block the assets, and the sealed envelope with the formal complaint against him. I put them all on the table, one by one, sealed hard, one by one, as if putting the final cards of a game he thought he had already won. What is this game? He asked, bringing his face closer to mine. I smelled the strong perfume mixed with anger. He tried to take the papers, but I took a step back. He extended his arm again. Faster. None. And I pulled away. This time, he lost control. He slapped the table. Picked up the dish that was drying on the colander and threw it at the wall. The porcelain exploded into pieces. The sound echoed throughout the house, but I didn't tremble. Not this time. I kept my gaze steady, fixed to his, as if looking at a stranger. Mom. He started screaming, saying that I was ruining my own family, that I was going to pay dearly, that no one was going to believe me. It was the same speech as always, the one that used to enter my chest like a knife. But now, he was knocking on the wrong door, because I had already left the house in which he locked me one day. I was somewhere else, inside me. Something had already changed forever. It was then that we heard a noise at the door, a light click, a movement. Aaron turned around. Annoyed, ready to yell at whoever was there. And then we saw Clarice, my neighbor, standing there with her cell phone in her hand. The door was ajar. She had heard everything, and he was recording. The light from the viewfinder illuminated her face, serena and steadfast, irritated in the right way. I thought Mrs. Phyllis needed someone here. She said, "That's all." A small sentence that carried a lifetime. Aaron was speechless, not knowing if he screamed, if he tried to take his cell phone, and the pow, if he ran away. I kept standing still, breathing slowly, and then I calmly said the phrase ID kept for years. "You've always been good with numbers, Aaron." The shop. "Now see if you can calculate how long you will spend behind bars." He stood still. For the first time, I saw fear on his face. True, now, raw. And it wasn't afraid of me. It was fear of the truth. Fear of the evidence. Fear of finally finding a limit that he never imagined I would raise. Clarice turned off the recording and said, "I've already sent it to my husband. Now just don't talk to why one now is coming." Hell. Silence took over the kitchen again. But this time, it wasn't his silence. It was mine. And my silence was now a sentence. Aaron took a deep breath, as if trying to compose himself. I watched him walk away slowly, pick up the briefcase on the floor, look at the papers without the courage to touch them. He didn't say anything. He didn't even try to intimidate me anymore. It just came out. But I knew that this was not the end. He was still going to try one last card. A desperate attempt to regain control. And I knew exactly when it would come. The question is, would I be ready when he decided to strike again? You'll find that out in the next chapter. 2 days after that kitchen showdown, the morning began with a biting cold in Springfield, the kind of cold that makes porch wood crackle and windows breathe dull air. I had been awake since 5, but this time it wasn't out of fear, nor out of habit. It was for vigil. I knew what was going to happen that day, and somehow I wanted to be awake for every second of it. At 8 o'clock sharp, Ned said. The police car stopped in front of my house. 2 officers, Sergeant Miller and Officer Harper, stepped out of the car with steady steps, and I greeted them at the front door. They treated me with a kindness that I was not used to receiving within my own walls. Mrs. My dear Phyllis, let's follow everything. You don't have to worry. I just nodded. How? Words were still hard to form at that time. You want to? Not out of weakness, but out of an old tiredness that finally had room to breathe. Aaron hurried downstairs, his face distressed, his hair disheveled, as if he had slept badly, and for the first time, I knew it wasn't because of me. He wore a work outfit, but scruffy, without that usual, almost theatrical care. In each hand, a large suitcase. He tried to maintain an elegance that no longer existed. He looked at the officers, took a deep breath, and muttered, "That's a misunderstanding. I'll solve it." Then he looked at me. Oh, that look! It was a mixture of disbelief, resentment, and something I had never seen before. Fragility? New. I remained on the balcony, standing, with my hands crossed over my stomach. I didn't tremble, I didn't deviate, I didn't soften. There was not a tear in my eyes, and that, I realized, seemed to hurt him more than any words could. Mr. Aaron Davis, said Sergeant Miller, consulting a document by the protective order issued by the court. You must leave this residence immediately. Mrs. Phyllis will remain on the property. Any attempt to return will result in immediate arrest. Aaron looked around, as if looking to his neighbors for support. And Leo, of course, they were there, hiding behind the curtains, pretending to tidy up the plants in the garden, collecting newspapers they had collected earlier. He tried to smile at them, that rehearsed smile of a good son, a successful businessman, an exemplary citizen, but no one smiled back. Everyone had heard the screams. Everyone had seen Clarice going in and out of there frequently. No one was blind. No one was a fool. Only I had been for a long time. When he passed me, stopping on the last step of the balcony, he opened his mouth as if to say something. Maybe it was an apology. Perhaps it was another threat. Maybe it was the old attempt at emotional manipulation that I knew so well. But nothing came out. Nothing. He just sighed, lowered his gaze, and went down to the sidewalk. The suitcase dragged on the concrete with a harsh sound. Each step felt heavy. No. Every move felt like a piece of the power he thought he had been ripped away. I squeezed the paper I was holding tighter. The official document confirming that the house was again only in my name. Not just my home, my territory, my history, my decades-long effort. Everything I had built with my hands, with a tired body, so long, and so cow, with sleepless nights while Aaron was still a feverish baby. Everything was coming back to me, not as a prize, but as justice. Savannah did not show up. At no time. I learned later that she had packed up some things and returned to her mother's house in Evanston. She herself said, in a short message that she felt deceived by Aaron, that she had no idea of the deviations, the lies, the manipulations, and that he couldn't look at me without feeling ashamed. Oh, shame for never having asked, shame for never having noticed. I didn't answer, only soon and sound. Sometimes silence is the only answer left when words would be unnecessary. When Aaron finally got into the app car, he called himself. The door slammed hard, Mayhem, and the car disappeared around the corner of Oak Ridge Drive, leaving behind only a trail of fine dust and a cold wind that cut through my skin. But it didn't knock me down. No more. The house became so quiet after they were gone. So incredibly quiet. But for the first time, that silence didn't frighten me. He didn't cut my breath away. He didn't put me on alert. It was a silence that welcomed. A silence that embraced. A silence of peace, of rest. I sat in the armchair in the living room, the same one he kept throwing things over. No town, and I'm out. And I felt my whole body collapse, but in a good way, a way of someone who finally lets go of a weight that he carried for years without realizing how heavy it was. But as I took a deep breath, finally feeling the air enter my lungs, something inside me began to itch, a feeling that it was not the end of it, because Aaron is not the type to accept defeat easily, and because the world he built on lies, deviance, and manipulation was about to crumble. And when a castle falls, whoever is inside it always tries to cling to any wall they find. And the question that kept hammering in my head as I looked at that room for the first time, really mine, was simple, but scary. How far would he be willing to go now that he had lost everything? In the days following Aaron's departure, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but I still didn't breathe completely. It was as if my lungs had unlearned to trust the air. I woke up early, made my coffee my way, strong, sweet, with that cream that he always said was a thing for relaxed people, and sat on the porch just to feel the cold wind cut my face. And it was there, in that wooden chair that he had seen many winters, that the first sign that he had not given up appeared. My phone rang, his name shining on the screen. I let it play until it stopped. Minutes later, now touchdown, awakens somewhere. A message, then another, miss, and yet another. Mom, can we talk? I know I made a mistake, but am willing to change. Please, answer. I stared at the lit screen, feeling a strange weight in my chest. It wasn't nostalgia. It was that old mother's instinct that tries to get up even after being beaten. An instinct that I needed to control, not feed. I closed the cell phone and left it on the table. Minutes later, mine? Why? A long, almost dramatic email arrived, full of rehearsed phrases. I was in a difficult moment. You know I love you. There is no family without forgiveness. I read each line as if reading a letter from a stranger, because my son, the boy I raised, was not there. Here was only the man who had learned to use words as a tool, as a weapon, as a tight noose. Oh, I forwarded everything to my lawyer and returned to my already cold cup of coffee. At the end of that afternoon, the bell rang. When I opened the door, pound, he's tin. I found a huge bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers, the same ones I put on the table on Sundays when my husband was still alive. The delivery man only said, "What? This one? What's Tokyo?" It was asked to deliver urgently. How? There was no card. Niece. But I knew who it came from. I closed the door slowly, put the flowers in a vase, and stared at them for a while, trying to understand if that gesture touched me or hurt me. Both, perhaps. Flowers did not erase bruises, nor invisible scars. The next morning, higher, the biggest impact came. One so thou. Handwritten letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the same handwriting I saw on the notes he left on the fridge as a child. Mom, am asking for forgiveness. Am not perfect. I can improve. Let me go home, just so we can talk. The pen felt heavy on every curve of the letter. One sincere. But I couldn't give in. Not now. Because if I gave in once, everything would go back to the way it was before. And I had spent too much time living as a shadow within my own life. I took a deep breath and kept the letter in a wooden box, where I used to keep old photos. I thought, nay, maybe one day I'll read it again. But not today. It was then that I received another call, this time from Savannah. No, her voice was weaker, now less secure. Siradonal, Sigadaster Sector, Ansta Punchitu, almost human. This is wild. Phyllis, I wanted to apologize. I didn't know anything. I swear I didn't know. I felt betrayed too. I know I don't have the right. But can I stop by? Just to talk. Silence crossed me. Savannah, I'll miss you. That girl with expensive dresses and strong perfume had finally come down from her pedestal, and for the first time I heard sincerity in her voice. But even then, I just said, not now. I needed to choose carefully who came back into my life, who crossed my door, Lisa, who breathed my air, and Savannah. She had no room there. Not yet. But the call that almost made me cry came a few hours later. It was from the little girl from Savannah. Well, the little girl I took care of for 2 years, who came here after school, who drew crooked flowers for me and called me Miss Fee. Her teacher helped send an email, and there was the drawing. Me, her, and a huge sun above our heads. In the corner, in small letters, was written, "I miss you." That hurt at a point that I didn't even know I was still alive. That kind of sweet pain, which confuses. I closed my eyes, held the tablet with both hands, and let it burn a little inside. Because that child, that one was innocent in all this. It wasn't her fault that she had broken adults around. Maybe, at the end of it all, I would find a way to see her again. But not now. Not yet. So I printed the drawing, folded it with affection, and kept it in the drawer where the things I couldn't lose were. And, Will, look, Lee, let me tell you something here. What? Deep down, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So, if you're here with me, listening to this part of my life, like this video and subscribe. It's not just for me, but for this story to reach someone who may need to know that there is still a way out. Sometimes we just need a little light on in someone else's house to remind us that we are not alone in the darkness. In the following days, his silence turned to insistence, and the insistence turned to despair. He started sending messages saying that he was sick, that he needed to talk, that no one understood him. She even created a video crying, saying that mother is sacred, that everyone makes mistakes, that family is forever. I watched the video only once. He spoke with trembling hands, but his eyes, the eyes still had that same shadow of control, that same camouflaged arrogance. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted access. He wanted a return. He wanted the door open again. But I held firm to what I learned too late. Certain pains do not dissolve with rehearsed tears. Certain wounds only heal when we close the door and turn the key. I forwarded everything to Joe, my lawyer, and went about my routine. My days began to take shape. The house was mine again. Mine being whole. I opened the windows without fear. I made soup with salt, with little salt, or without salt, just the way I liked it. And for the first time in a long time, I ate sitting at the table, calmly. Once det är så gratis super, without looking over my shoulder. But what I didn't imagine is that Aaron still had one last card to try to turn the tide. No voicing. A bold attempt on mine, desperate now, and very, very dangerous, because when a person is about to lose everything, they can become someone you've never seen before. And that's exactly what happened. No, Paul. Are you ready to hear what he did next? Because I still remember it like it was yesterday. The day of judgment dawned, cloudy, the kind that seems to carry an omen in the air, as if heaven itself knew that something needed to be settled, finally put in place. I woke up before the alarm clock, put on my navy blue ensemble, the same one I wore to my husband's funeral, and left the house with slow but steady steps, feeling that every meter walked to the courthouse was a piece of my history being recovered. When I arrived, I saw Adrian standing in the doorway with a discreet wave, Clarice holding a folder of documents, Mary Beth behind, and Sue, nervous, no, but present, and Joe, my lawyer, with that always calm, no, almost paternal look. Entering that building was like going through decades of silence. But I went in, and I went in entirely. Aaron was there too, sitting next to his lawyer, his face downcast, thinner, and his beard unshaven, and still trying to maintain that air of superiority he had always worn as armor, though now it was peeling, dull, How? When he saw me, wow, he looked away. And that was the first victory of the day. The trial began quickly, no, directly, no, none, with no room for staging. The prosecutor presented bank statements, voice recordings, forged signatures, evidence of the embezzlement of more than $50,000. Adrian stepped on the witness stand first, speaking with a clarity that moved me. As if his every word was a brick reconstructing the truth. Then came Mary Beth, explaining the movement alerts, the attempts to hide values, the unauthorized access. Clarice showed the video recorded on the day of the incident, and the room was so quiet that I could hear the noise of my own heart beating. Slowly, as someone breathing a sigh of relief after years of suffocation. And, at that moment, while I was watching that video, I realized that some pains we only really understand when we see it from the outside. And if you're listening to this now, I'll tell you, sometimes it's by looking at our own fall that we discover where we start to get up. When my name was called, I climbed the steps of the courtroom, feeling my knees weaken, but with my spine more erect than in all my life. I stood up, put my hand to the book, and swore to tell the truth, which was almost irony, because my whole life had been too true, hidden under too much fear. My testimony was simple, new, short, mine, direct, the way I always was. I didn't come here for revenge. I came out of respect, something they took away from me. Today, I take it back. I didn't tremble. Oh, I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I just said, Un. The judge was silent for a few seconds afterward. Nubai, Hadiadawata, looking at the papers before him. And in that silence I felt, like a whisper through my bones, that a huge chapter was closing. When the sentence was read, wah, Aaron bowed his head, and I had never seen my son like this. Without a mask, without pride, without that arrogant glow. Siun, bye. The judge accepted all the measures: loss of professional license, total freezing of assets, and sentence of 3 years in a closed regime, with possible progression. It wasn't about time in prison. It was about acknowledging the truth, the most symbolic. However, was when the judge explained that the house was never legally in his name. The attempted transfer had been barred by the lack of my true signature, and all forgeries were now attached to the file. Nil sales down. Aaron left that courtroom with no property, no reputation, no control, and perhaps for the first time, without excuse. As he was escorted out, I looked behind him and felt not joy, not triumph, not revenge. I felt only closure, like a door that finally closes without making a sound. And when I left the courtroom and the cold wind touched my face, I realized that this was not yet the end, because there is a moment after the fall in which we need to decide what we are going to do with our own freedom. And that's exactly what it's about, which I need to tell you next. The news of the trial ran through the neighborhood like wind on a dry day, the kind that raises dust even from the quietest houses. I didn't have to tell anything. I didn't have to explain. All of Springfield seemed to already know who Aaron was without the mask he had worn for so many years. And the company where he worked was the first to act, cutting ties, releasing an official statement about internal deviations and breach of trust. Cold words that flowed like ice, but that finally gave a name to what I experienced. Savannah filed for divorce soon after, and although I never wished her harm, I felt a weight leave my chest, knowing that she chose to break the cycle before becoming an accomplice, before being swallowed by the same silence that accompanied me for so long. The neighbors began to see him walking through the streets with the electronic ankle bracelet attached to his ankle, head down, short steps, like a punished boy, but he was not a boy. He was a man who only learned to be big when he leaned on me. His co-workers disappeared. Facade, friends disappeared. No one else appeared to defend him, because the truth has a cruel way of illuminating only what matters. Meanwhile, in the same city, on the same street, in the same house where the echo of his screams still lived on the walls, I began to rebuild myself. One gesture at a time, as if renewing his own bones. I went back to the neighborhood church, the one he banned one day, and was greeted at the door with hugs that smelled of warm bread and longing. I sat down again on the wooden bench where I used to sing, closed my eyes, and felt the music enter my skin like an old prayer. I returned to the library's reading group, which meets every Wednesday, and the women welcomed me as if I were a missing chapter in their book. One told me, "We missed you," and that was so simple, so small, but so big for me. I also started participating in community events, fairs, meetings, neighbors' meetings, and every time I left the house, it was as if I erased another of the traces of fear that Aaron left hanging on my shoulders. Even my clothes changed. For the first time in years, I opened my wardrobe and chose what I wanted to wear. Not what he approved of, not what he said appropriate for his age. I bought a yellow dress, one of those that seemed to carry the sun on the wires, and when I put it on, I felt something inside me warm up like embers rekindling. At home, I began a small, silent, intimate renovation. I painted the kitchen light blue, the same shade I saw in magazine houses when I was young and never had the courage to choose. I changed the broken plates, those that kept two bad memories, and bought a new kettle, made of shiny stainless steel, £1, which beeps when the water boils, a sound that reminds me that life goes on, that the water heats up, and that the day goes on. I spent entire afternoons rearranging closets, sweeping corners I hadn't seen in years, washing, cleaning, rebuilding everything with my own hands. The house was getting lighter, and so was I, and something precious began to happen. No one raised their voice with me anymore. Cut. Nobody. It was as if the world had understood that this woman, the one who folded quilts while carrying bruises, the one who made soup crying, the one who stifled steps so as not to provoke storms, no longer existed. And in the middle of it all, a phrase accompanied me like a whisper, a reminder of what it took me all my life to see. Sometimes the greatest victory is not when the other falls. That's when we finally get up. I was still learning to live with this new freedom. I still stumbled over the emotional corners he left. I still caught myself looking at the door, thinking that at any moment he would enter. But now I took a deep breath and remembered that danger had a name, address, and sentence. But even with all this silent peace that was beginning to sprout, there was a visit that I still had to face, an arrangement that fate would not let go unnoticed. And when that day came, oh, honey, he changed everything again. I started that letter on a cold afternoon, when the wind was blowing on the windows, as if to remind me that certain stories, as much as they hurt, still need to be written. I I sat down at the living room table, took the stationery I had kept for years, a cream, thick paper, no, you see what the kind that was used before everything became a canvas, and wrote his name at the top. Aaron, not Andy, just writing. My hand weighed down. This, no, town. As if each letter had the weight of everything I experience. I began by telling the truth that I had, perhaps, never said out loud. That I loved him deeply, from the moment I heard his first cry, in St. Mary's Hospital, when it was still snowing outside, and I thought the world was simple, good, and full of promise. I told him about the sleepless nights, when I sat on the edge of the bed while he coughed, about the carefully measured medicines, about the constant fear of losing the only little piece of life I had that size. I wrote about the 3 jobs, about the bread and jam I prepared before sunrise, about the way I kept money in envelopes hidden inside the closet so that he could have books, sneakers, opportunities. I told him about the dreams I had for him, dreams so big that sometimes I was out of breath just imagining it. I wanted him to be happy, honest, to have a life I never had, to be loved by someone who saw in him the boy I saw. But the pen advanced to the next lines. I felt my chest tighten in a different way. There, meanwhile, I wrote what it took me decades to understand. I spent so many years thinking that loving someone too much was a test of strength. But today, I understood that loving someone too much cannot mean forgetting about oneself. My hands trembled as I wrote this, not from weakness, but from recognition. I kept saying that I didn't know exactly where I failed. Well, in what part of the path my boy got lost, in what curve he stopped seeing his mother and started to see a servant, an object, an available silence. I wrote that I spent years trying to justify everything, saying that he was tired, long, stressed, pressured, when in fact I was afraid, a fear so great that it ate me inside. I also told him that I often wondered if my love, that enormous love that I carried as a cross and a flag, had been misinterpreted, mistaken for submission, for weakness, for lack of value. And maybe it was because I forgot to teach him to love me back. When I realized that my tears were falling on the paper, I stopped for a moment, breathed, and wrote the sentence that hurt the most, but that needed to come out of me like a stone being torn from my chest. I am no longer the woman kneeling on the kitchen floor. What is in fire to your wins? I'm still. After that sentence, silence, a silence so deep that the whole house seemed to hear. I kept saying that I did not wish him evil, that I would never wish him harm, because my heart was not made for hatred, but that wishing good could not mean accepting the worst. He also said that even if he never read that letter, and Tokyo, even if it never reached his hands, I had to write it. I needed to put into words everything I carried in silence while washing dishes, while cleaning stains from the floor, dear I touched it, while hiding purples, while swallowing insults. When I finished, I read it all over again, from beginning to end, and I felt something strange, as if each sentence was a door that I closed definitively. Then I folded the paper slowly, carefully. No, mind she said, and a natural close this as one folds an old party dress, and walked to the fireplace. The fire was still weak, trembling. Down. A sausage is asking for wood. I opened my hand and dropped the letter inside. The flames caught fast, climbed up the edges of the paper, turned my words to ash, and I stood there, watching until the last spark disappeared. It was not anger that I felt, and it was not sadness either. It was something else. It was liberation, as if I had finally returned to the past what no longer belonged to my present. I left there lighter, with my shoulders unclipped of an old weight, and as the soft smell of burnt paper filled the room, a new sensation began to be born inside me. Small, Lonate, and wild, shy, but alive. The feeling that, for the first time, my whole life was in my hands. But fate sometimes likes to test those who have just gotten up, and the next day you don't do quiet. When I least expected it, I say went on, Leodora Ice. An unexpected visitor knocked on my door and changed everything again. Today, as I sit here on the porch with my cup of chamomile tea and watch the sun sink behind the trees of Springfield, I realize that this silence that surrounds me is no longer the same as the one that suffocated me before. Now, it is a silence that breathes with me, that embraces me, that returns me to the world without fear. And it was here, in this quiet twilight, that I finally understood that everything aligned as I needed. Aaron has served his sentence. Savannah has rebuilt her life away from the lies he has built. And her daughter, that little girl with the colorful drawing, sometimes sends me cards around school. Everyone went their own way, and I went mine. A simple, calm path, way, full of small choices that I reclaimed for myself. I went back to cooking without haste, to humming while I stir the pot, to sleep without waking up scared. And I found in the community center a group of women who, like me, learned too late that silence hurts, but it also teaches. In a reading circle, I shared my story and said a sentence that came out of the inside as if I was waiting years to be said. For many years, I was just Aaron's mother. Now, you are there work at town. Phyllis again. How's it can't talk to you? And when I said that, I felt my chest open, a deep relief, as if I had finally found myself again after having lost myself in someone who did not see my value. Time has not erased the wounds, and perhaps it shouldn't, but it has transformed each one of them into a scar of courage, a reminder of what I endured and the strength I discovered when I thought I no longer had it. And this is the lesson I take with me. To love can never mean to disappear. And no one deserves to live diminished to fit into someone else's world, because life has too many paths for us to reduce to one. And if you walked with me here, I want to thank you really, with an open heart, for listening to me, for staying until the end. His company reminded me that no story needs to be hidden when it finds a welcoming ear. And look, if this story touched you in any way, leave a like, because for me, it is like a silent hug that warms up this little corner here. And sign up too, because this way it's as if you were invited to come back for the next coffee with me, just the way I like it. Wow. Hot, simple and full of good conversation. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching. I want to know how far this story has traveled. It also activates the bell, my dear, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Now, nay, before you go, stay here a moment longer with me. Nay, so card, I so gensio, and don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.